Welcome to our webinar on automating policy management leveraging Microsoft 365 and SharePoint. I'm Daryl Trimble, CEO of SP Marketplace. We provide business applications built on top of Microsoft 365. We've been in business for 12 years, or since really the inception of Office 365. We have 1,500 installations of our solutions worldwide. We are a very close Microsoft partner. I myself have 30 years in IT and software. You can find out more about SP Marketplace at spmarketplace.com. Our agenda today is taking a look at, first of all, what is policy management in an organization, really providing an overview for the definition of policy management and more. Then we'll take a look at the policy management process. How do you manage policies in an organization? And what are the steps and what are the best practices? We'll take a look at how you can automate those processes leveraging Microsoft 365 and SharePoint. And then finally, we'll give you a demonstration of a SharePoint solution built for policy management automation. Just a quick overview of our products. We provide out-of-the-box ready applications. They are native no-code solutions built on SharePoint, Teams, and the Power Platform. They are 100% customizable by Power Business users like yourself. And this means that you can quickly accelerate and get best practices built into your solution while being able to customize it for your unique needs. Our apps also evolve with Microsoft 365 and include many of the new capabilities going forward as part of our subscription. That's enough about SP Marketplace. Now let's talk about policy management. So first of all, let's kind of set the base here for what is policy management. Many organizations think policy management might be, your HR employee handbook, and that's your policies. Others realize that it's much more than that, and that policy management is very important to the organization to protect it from liabilities, risks, and those type of things, and also establishing some business rules of conduct and so on. So policy management really is the process of creating, communicating, and maintaining policies that outline an organization's guidelines, rules, and procedures. It involves assessing business needs, identifying risks, establishing policies, and implementing procedures that tie to those policies. Policy management, even more today than ever, is critical to many organizations for corporate governance, and it's essential to protect an organization from risk and making sure that it is keeping within regulatory compliance. And the key thing here is it's not just related to HR. Policy management applies to many areas, including HR, safety, finance, IT, facilities, and more. So why is policy management so important? Well, it's really not policy management, it's compliance that's important. But policies help you to ensure compliance, whether it be regulatory compliance for certain industries such as healthcare with HIPAA or other things, construction, chemical industries. It also defines rules that can reduce legal liability, HR liability, safety liability and injuries, cyber threats, and financial risks. It provides also, beyond those, a code of conduct for how business is to be conducted within the organization. So some policies really aren't just there for regulatory or other reasons. It's there also on how you should act within the organization and work within the organization. It is also a training aid for new and existing employees for what is expected of them. It's really the documentation that says, this is how we work in our organization. And the other thing, if you're doing policy management correctly, it provides a uniform approach to compliance and policy management across different functions and departments. Now, we've been doing this for a long time, And we've talked with hundreds and hundreds of organizations, and what we find is that the reality in many organizations is that policy management or policy document management is often in complete chaos. A lot of times there's nobody in charge of it across the organization, nobody kind of even provided ownership. It a lot of times you have unstructured document storage where documents are spread across perhaps a file server, people's machines, that type of thing, and can lead to organization and confusion over compliance issues and what should be done. There's a lot of times a lack of document version control, and that can result in employees, look following, old and dated policies, perhaps from 3 or 4 years ago, that no longer apply, or that regulations may have changed. Um, the other thing is poor document organization can lead to wasted time searching for policy information by employees, sending emails around. Where can I find the policy for this or that, the dress code for cybersecurity, for working from home policy, whatever it might be. And a lot of times there's no consistent policy approach across departments or different functions. IT may do it one way, HR does it another way. They all keep their policy documents in different places, making it, again, confusing for employees. And what we find almost always is there's no kind of policy czar, or no one is responsible for policies in the organization. And a lot of times this is not a full-time job. It's something that there's a coordinator for, that people go to. Most of the work is done by the departments in this case. But we find almost always that a lot of this is in chaos in many organizations because they haven't taken the time to step back and organize it. And that presents a lot of risks. It's probably one of the biggest risks an organization can have, and it's almost always ignored. Okay, in many organizations, there's risk of non-compliance with industry regulations, which results in fines. It could result in a stoppage of your operation if you're not following some of these regulations. It's uh, very tough on an organization if they're not following regulations and been caught. Um, you have increased liability for the organization of lawsuits, of employee lawsuits, and those type of things if you haven't made clear what the policies are and they've not acknowledged it, especially if somebody's terminated for breaking a policy or not complying with something. Also, across the board, there's increased risks of cyber attacks. This relates to, cell phone policies and work at home policies and how you use your IT devices. Safety with worker injuries. If there isn't the right safety training or the regulatory OSHA type things, can result in workers being injured or even killed. Financial theft. There's scams. There's um, getting into systems and so on, which could cause uh, very tough financial things, and many more circumstances like that. And the other thing that we find is it's an inefficient use of employees, that when they are told they have to follow policies but can't find them, or don't know where to look for them, or don't know how to review them, that leads to a lot of frustration with employees and management. And it really leads to an increased potential for legal action that you can't really defend against because you can't find the documents, you can't find anything that says that the employee, knew the policy or acknowledged a policy, yet was not compliant. And then they come back and sue you for being terminated. And that can result in financial losses. So the risks are great of not doing this or ignoring it. So let's look at the policy management process. How can you set up a process to get a head start in policy management? Well, the policy management life cycle is something that is pretty well defined. However, putting it in place can be time consuming and costly if you don't have the right types of automation and system. So if we take a look at the life cycle, it's really starting with defining and developing the policy. You might even start from policy template. that you, if you want to have some consistent templates for how policies are developed. Um, then in the development, you're certainly, it's not somebody working in a vacuum. They certainly are going to need to have collaboration and reviews of their peers, if it's the safety department, if it's HR, if it's management, to actually develop the policy. And once the final draft is developed, then it's very important to make sure that leadership, the appropriate leadership, approves the policy, because that's what's going to be put in place, and it's going to impact, many employees in the organization. Once it's approved, then you want to publish it. And what we mean by publishing it is everything in the development cycle here thus far has been what we call the policy source. It probably is a Word document that you're actually working with. And once you publish it, you may want to publish it as a PDF document in a separate database or library for that employees are going to access. And it should be the current policy that's out there. And then the next step really comes is the employee access. So when we take a look at it, what we've just been talking about here is policy owners in the development of the policy. But once it's published, then that's when it really goes out to the employees. And this is where the communication comes in. Communicating it to the employees is important. No policy is any good if nobody knows about it. So you want to be able to have the employees be able to access the policy easily, know where to get to it as well. And the second thing you want to do with employees is to make sure that when you publish a new policy, that for those employees the policy applies to, and it may not apply to everybody. You may have a policy groups of employees or those type of things that the policy applies to. You want to send an email out to them, let them know the policy's there with a link to the policy, and then actually have them acknowledge that they've gotten it and read it and have some way to track that. Okay, that's the only way that you can really assure compliance that stands up in the legal system, for instance. And then finally, as the policy goes through its life cycle, policies typically have a lifespan. They may be an annual policy, like an employee handbook. It could be a shorter time frame. It could be a longer time frame. But all policies have a life cycle where they will expire, or they need to be updated or renewed. And that really brings it back into the policy development cycle. And one of the key things here is, how do you track this, and how do you make sure that policies don't expire that should not be expiring? That there's going to be risk of that. So let's kind of dive into this a little bit more. And we're really just talking the process here. We're not talking about automating the process yet with SharePoint. We'll be looking at that in just a minute. But to automate a process, you have to know what the process is. So the first thing is to define your process, your policies. And you really, at the very beginning of this process, you want to ensure that the policies align with organizational goals. In other words, get leadership involved, decide what types of policies that you need to create for the organization, and also what ones are impacted by other things. So the other thing too is to clearly define policies and procedures. They should be clearly written. That should be very clear on um, what the actions that should be taken on the policy, what can and cannot be done. And you can also have many reasons for a policy. There could be legal reasons, which is really mostly what a lot of HR policies are. It could be regulatory. I brought up HIPAA for healthcare, for instance, or OSHA for safety type things. You also may have identified risks and threats. This is the cybersecurity side of this, for instance, or financial threats with scams and so on, that you may want to establish policies that hopefully prevent some of that. And then you also might have organizational culture and goals, how people should treat one another, policy for working at home, and other things too. And then what you want to do is also identify those departments and functions that are going to be responsible for the different types of policies. So these are all kind of at the define the overall policy approach for the organization. And then the next step is really let's develop the policy. So you identify a policy need, okay, and whoever's writing the policy, typically you should have an owner of a policy or an author, if you would. And they're going to conduct research, gather information. They may actually go out and find what other companies are doing for this type of policy. They will then draft the policy, sometimes using a template, and typically get collaborative reviews, get their peers with the same expertise to review it, make sure that everything's good, and get it to what we would call the final draft side of this. At that point, you're going to want to obtain approvals from identified leaders that have to approve the policy, and then at that point, it is ready to publish. And you can publish the policy, and it should be to a separate database or library, if you would, that is where employees will access the policy. You don't want to have them access the same library or database where your source for that library, the Word document, is. That's not good. Then beyond that, you want to manage and track updates and renewals to the policies. You want to make sure that if this policy is renewing in 1 year annually, that you have something on the calendar or something tells you, hey, you need to start working on this ahead of time because this is coming up for review and renewal. One thing also you're going to want to do is establish a policy archive. You don't want to just delete policies. If you're going to have handbook for 2024 and then a new handbook in 2025, you probably want to rename that, not just do version updates of it, and put the 2024 handbook in a policy archive. Now, as we said earlier, the key here, though, is to communicate policies effectively. Okay, so one of the things that we have found is that every organization may have a handbook, but that handbook may need to go to different groups. We have a customer that is a commercial solar company that is in California, Nevada, and Arizona. It's a regional business. Each of those states actually has different employment laws. And so therefore they need to create a handbook that is the California handbook, the Arizona handbook, and the Nevada handbook. And they need to find policy groups that are made up of those employees that are in California. They will get the California handbook. So you need to define policy groups. It's not everybody gets everything. You want to ensure that policies are communicated clearly. You want to send it out in email, let them know that the policy is out there as well. And you probably want to establish a central place, portal, hub, whatever you want to call it, that employees can access and search current policies. Because they may get it, early in the year, but they may have a question about, work from home policy by April, and they need to know where to find the latest current policy. You need to also train all employees on policies, both existing employees and new hires. So just don't throw the policy out there. It's good to have, we suggest even webinars by the policy team that can train the employee. What does this policy say? What does it mean? And also give a place they can ask questions. You also want to provide ongoing training as policies change too. So it's not a one-time thing. When the new handbook comes out or whatever it might be, there might be new OSHA regulations, new other regulations. You're going to want to have some type of training. It might even be in the form of a video training. And the other thing too is to encourage feedback from employees. There's nothing worse than having a frustrated employee with a policy that may be a poorly written or a poorly implemented policy, but they don't know who to talk to. So communication is key. Next, you now have your policy process in place. You're pushing the policies out. The question is, how do you enforce it? How do you monitor it? How do you implement it so that you know that the employees are getting it and that they are actually reading it and acknowledgement. So you need to implement a policy acknowledgement process, whether it be signing off on a paper policy or sending an email and saying, please reply back that you've read this and understand it. Um, that is important because when it comes down to any legal issues or so on, um, you having that acknowledgement says that I read it, I understood it, and if I'm terminated because of it, I can't claim that I didn't know about it. Um, and you want to monitor policy compliance regularly. You know, if you've got 100 employees, you need to almost have either a spreadsheet or a list or whatever it is of employees and what policies they have come back and complied with, and also find those that have not and follow up on them. Uh, it's also good to capture non-compliance incidents. Now, what this really is, and a lot of people don't think about this, but if somebody is terminated for non-compliance of a policy, you probably want to record that as an incident um, there, so that you can, number one, relate to it. But when you're reviewing your policies, you can also review those incidents. And you want to establish a policy enforcement process. You want to make clear that if somebody is not compliant, what is the actions that will be taken against them? It may not be termination. It may be, training. It might be other things too. And you also want to provide regular policy effectiveness reporting to leadership. In other words, how many have been acknowledged, how many incidents there's been, and so on, as part of your process. So there's a lot to that process, and it could take a lot of time if you're doing it manually. If you're trying to do it with spreadsheets, if you're have no way of kind of managing the documents and those type of things, that can be very time consuming. So how do you automate this process? And the nice thing is, if you have Office 365 and SharePoint, a lot of the components for automating this are actually built into the system, the cloud system that you already have in Office 365. So let's look at a little bit further at this and take a look at the process and where it can be automated. So first of all, the whole develop, define, collaborate, review, and approve can actually be done if you set up a SharePoint site. Let's call it a policy management portal. And this is going to have your libraries in it that you're going to actually manage the policies. You're going to need to set up permissions, possibly folders with permissions for HR policies, safety policies, and so on, so that the people from those departments can get in and edit and manage those policies. You're also going to want to take advantage of Teams and Word because you can go in and actually share documents. You can have collaborative reviews, comments, all those type of things are built into the Office 365 Word um, and Teams model with collaborative development of documents. And so you want to take advantage of that. You don't want to be sending them back and forth on email. That's really becomes a recipe for disaster if you're doing that. So take advantage of the collaborative capabilities within Teams and SharePoint. Also, on the approvals, you don't want to have to be chasing down a executive or whoever's approving these things, and you don't want to have them sign off manually on a piece of paper. That's never good either. So take advantage of the workflows that are in SharePoint for automated approvals as well. And even setting up, it might be a single approver, it might be a serial approver, it might be multiple approvers, and as part of the process. That saves you a lot of time also, and it documents an audit trail of the approval itself. And once you get that done, you're ready to publish. And so all of this was done in the policy management portal in SharePoint, and there was a library set up for policy development. And this is where all the policy source is. And once you're ready to publish, you can actually set up a flow, or you can just pick it up and move it yourself to another library, which we will call our published policies library. And you probably want to save it as a PDF You could actually create a workflow that when you're ready to publish and put it in published status from the development library, will copy it over to the published policy library. And you also want to make sure that it replaces, or you don't have multiple yearly versions or whatever in that published policy library. It's important that employees are always getting the latest version. So also by putting it into that employee access library, you also can create in SharePoint what we call a My Portal Policies portal. And this is a portal directly for employees to go in and not only get to the latest policies by doing searches or whatever it might be and being able to review them, but also you can put things like news announcements. You could actually put your little webinars in there that are policy training and so on, so that it becomes an information portal more than just a I'm searching for a policy portal too. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to do here, and that you can either do this manually or it can be automated, is when a new policy is published into the portal, you're going to want the employees it's targeted at. And by the way, that portal, you can use both metadata in the library and folders to make sure that only the policy group that is supposed to get it, maybe it's an executive's policy, um, can get to that folder. So you can actually put governance into it as well. And the nice thing though is you can actually automate the compliance and acknowledgements with a workflow that actually, when a policy is published, if you have a list of employees and what groups, policy groups they're in, you can have it send it to the entire policy group with a link to the policy and ask them to um, acknowledge that they have gotten the policy and read it and send that back. So that starts to put in your whole compliance side of this. And legally, at least in the United States, that is enough. Electronic compliance by an email that can only be gotten by that employee, a reply or some compliance related to that email is good enough for legal situations. So now that you're in that cycle, you've gone through the compliance, you've given the employees a portal to work from. Um, Now the next thing really comes down to is it's a year later. Maybe there was the handbook that was published in January of 2023. Now you're coming up on 2024, and you're going to need to look at updates for that handbook. Same thing goes with any regulatory things and so on. So what you really want to do is set up metadata in that development policy development library that we used earlier that has dates in it that will remind the owners when it's going to be expiring, because part of the metadata is when it starts and when it expires as far as the policy, and send them an email ahead of time that says, hey, a reminder, you're going to have to renew this thing as well. And it will all, you can also have it send out notifications on expiration and so on to management. So all of this, by using SharePoint and automating policy management, can make life a lot easier and make it much more productive for those that have to manage the policies, and make everything much more accessible and less frustrating from the employee side. So let's now just take a look at that overview here of what SharePoint can do for you. So if we take a look at SharePoint for policy management, what are some of the things that SharePoint brings to it? Well, SharePoint can be used for storing and sharing policies and procedures across the organization through that My Policies portal, for instance. You can centralize all key documents and processes into that policy site so that no matter if it's safety or IT or whatever, you've got a common process that's being used. And of course, you can use governance of permissions to separate out work on the policies by department. SharePoint brings with it, and it's really Power Automate, can be used to automate policy workflows for approvals, for renewals, for even letting managers know that an employee has an acknowledgement that they didn't acknowledge over a certain amount of time. So it gives notifications. It can provide version control. The SharePoint document management capabilities are very, very good for version control, for detailed comments and reviews, and full audit trails for all changes to policies. And again, employees can access policies through SharePoint site, that portal that we talked about. That's easy to do in SharePoint. And SharePoint search functionality can be used to, quickly locate specific policies or procedures. The cool thing is, I could be searching for what's our drug test procedure. If it's embedded in a employee handbook, it will still find it as part of the content in the handbook. So SharePoint really is the tool set that is really well set up to help you automate policy management. So let's just take a look at, if you're looking for a policy management system, what are the top features? Well, for policy, breaking it down into the process, for policy development, store and manage policy source documents, collaborate on policy development through MS Teams, automated policy workflows and approvals. You can securely store and track policy version history, consistent policy process across all departments with governance built in, and you can manage policy expiration and renewals. So those are all part of if we take a look at the process, policy development. Policy communications, you can push policies out via email to employees, letting them know that there is a new policy. You also can let them know that and link back to the repository. You're not attaching it, so they're not downloading something that might be out of date, 6 months from now. And they can come to that repository and do searches and whatever to find the information they need about a policy or procedure. Monitoring. This is really where you can go in and track employee acknowledgements by sending out acknowledgements by email with a link to the policy and having them either hit a button or reply. And it also allows you, by tracking it in, let's say, a Microsoft list of acknowledgements, to find out which ones are not compliant, which ones have not acknowledged it, and also you can track policy non-compliance incidents too, as well. And so it really gives you a lot of the tools to monitor compliance in policy management. And then finally, you can also set it up to do compliance reporting from the lists of acknowledgements. There are dashboards. You can also have policy status reports for which policies are coming up for renewal, and be able to see those through the libraries and lists as well. There is some work to set all this up, and that's where we come in. We have an out-of-the-box policy management product built in SharePoint that is called SP Policy Manager. This product is already built out with a staff portal, with the My Policies portal, with all the workflows. It tracks policy updates, it tracks compliance. There's a My Policy portal for employees. There's policy reporting and dashboard already built in. It can be accessed through SharePoint or Teams, and it really gives you, either 100% of what you need to manage policies, or 90% and with some customization meet exactly what your requirements are. So this is a product you probably want to take a look at, and take a look at using it for your policy management. And it gives you a nice head start into doing that. You can learn more about SP Policy Manager on our website, spmarketplace.com, and then on the menu structure, select Policy Manager. And you can request a demonstration. We do have videos there as well, and screen tours and full information on SP Policy Manager. It is one of our most popular products today, and we are seeing a lot of people succeed in doing this and really setting up policy management without huge investment of time. The product is also very reasonably priced. So take a look at that again at marketplace.com and go in the menu and select Policy Manager. So let's just revisit what we've learned today. First of all, the benefits of automating policy management. First, automating it obviously saves a lot of time and improves efficiency across the whole organization. The automated workflows and approvals, ensure consistent policy application across all departments and compliance. You can securely store and track policy versions, leveraging it. Policy miscommunication is reduced. Also, the possibility they may be using an old policy instead of a current one is reduced and makes everything easily accessible through that central repository. It can even be accessed through mobile as well. You're going to overall reduce the risk and increase compliance with automated acknowledgements, alerts, and notifications across the board. And policy management automation improves overall decision making and through better data analysis and seeing what's working, what's not. And the biggest thing is reduces risk overall. So once again, visit us at spmarketplace.com and let us know what you think.